What's up guys, welcome back to another video. You join me once again for another content advent calendar video. We've got a new video every day through to Christmas Eve. And today we're going to be talking about how to edit a photo of your pet in Lightroom. Now I've got a photo here of my little puppy Nala. She's a little bit older now, but I took this photo probably a couple of months ago now, but I quite like the photo, but we're going to go through how I edited it. Now, of course, this was taken back towards kind of late summer, I suppose. So it was a bit brighter. We had some kind of nice weather. So we've got a few challenges here already. I've deliberately tried to position her in the shade so that she wouldn't be completely kind of harsh shadows and all that kind of stuff. But we do have very bright light behind her, which we need to now kind of deal with. Obviously, there was no kind of flash or anything like that on her. I didn't want to kind of freak her out, but also, you know, I didn't feel the need to use it. I feel like we can get a good result without having to use that as well. So we're going to go through a bunch of different ways we're going to edit it. We can do a bit of global editing, but I think a lot of this is going to be local editing. So using adjustment brushes, radial filters, and stuff like that. And that is where some of the new features of Lightroom Classic really come in to make a very, very useful kind of addition to how we're going to edit this. So let's go ahead and begin editing this photo. So first thing I'm going to do is come up here to the crop tool. I'm just going to crop this a little bit to make her a little bit more central. I don't think I need all that room kind of on the right. I think probably it was more kind of about capturing that moment when she was looking at the camera rather than perfectly composing the shot. I knew I could crop it a little bit afterwards anyway. I've used a nice shallow depth of field here, f2.2 actually. So that means we've got a nice bit of kind of fall off, but her eyes are nice and kind of sharp, and we've got some good detail there on the face. So let's go ahead and actually what I'm going to do first, I would normally start with a kind of global edit, but I think this time I would actually prefer to start with some local edits because I think we need to deal with the area behind her being very bright and also brighten her up as well. So we can come up here to masking. So this is slightly different in the latest update of Lightroom Classic. And I'm going to go ahead and click select subject. Now, Lightroom's going to now detect the subject in the photo. I think it probably uses the same software that Photoshop uses for this kind of subject detection, and it's going to mask it. And you can see everything in red is now masked. And you see it's done a really, really good job there of masking out Nala, which is great. So I can then go ahead and just literally bring the exposure up and brighten her up. Now we can go back and adjust this afterwards. I'm going to brighten her initially like that. I think that looks really good. And let's go ahead and double click. You can see here where the masks have kind of opened up. Let's go ahead and double click mask one, and let's name this subject. That way we can keep track of everything. We can turn these on and off. We can go back and we can adjust these nice and easily. Now I'm actually going to do a new mask. So I can come up here to create new mask. Let's click select subject again, but this time, once Lightroom detects the subject, and it should do exactly the same job. Yep, there we go. I'm actually going to come in here. I'm going to click mask one, subject one here, and I'm going to click these little three dots. I'm going to click invert, and that's going to select everything other than Nala here, which is really, really useful. Now let's name this layer. I'm going to call this inverted subject. So it's everything other than Nala here. The sun appears to have come out in real life, so I wonder how the lighting is affected in my video. Interesting. So with the inverted subject mask selected, we can actually just bring that exposure down a touch, and we can certainly bring the highlights down. I think that's going to be really good without really affecting our subject. Now, what can start to happen here is you get almost too much of a separation between your subject and your background. It almost looks a bit kind of like you just composited the image in not particularly well. So we don't want to go too mad with this. In fact, I'm going to bring those highlights back up just a touch because, you know, we don't want to darken that area behind too much. If I show you, if we bring the highlights down, the exposure down, it just starts to look completely not all right. So we don't want to go too hard with that, but it's an interesting problem to have because it's an interesting problem to try and overcome within editing. So I'm going to click done here. I'm quite happy with kind of where we've got things to. We can actually look at the before and after, so we can use the backslash key to see this is where we started, this is where we've got to. I like how we've brightened her up. I think it's looking pretty good. We can also come back in here. I'm going to go masking actually again, even though I closed it, create new mask. I'm going to click the brush tool now. Now, what I want to do is actually just pop some masking over her eyes there, and I'm going to bring the clarity up and the exposure up a touch as well. I just want to make sure they are kind of popping within the image. We're going to click done for now. We're going to do a little bit of global editing. So we'll add a little bit of contrast. Let's bring the highlights down a touch, but this is kind of across the whole photo. So it'll affect our subject as well. Let's bring the shadows let's leave them pretty much as they are actually. I think they're okay. A bit of texture, a little bit of clarity, a bit of vibrance. I'm going to bring the saturation down a touch because I don't think it needs to be super, super saturated. So I'm going to leave the tone curve as it is for now, but we are probably going to come back and do some various things here. We can come to the hue, saturation, luminance. Let's bring the oranges down a little bit. Yellows, I think we could bring towards the greens a touch. Green as well, make it a little bit sort of richer. And just a little bit of blues towards the kind of aqua side of things. Now, we could also just add a bit of blue into the shadows here with a little bit of orange into the midtones and the highlights as well. I think that's going to look quite nice. We don't want to go too mad with it, and we might end up wanting to turn it off. That's what it looks like on, that's what it looks like off. It's just kind of warming that a little bit. We might come back and turn that off, but that's the beauty of doing this, right? We can put some things on, see where we get to. Now I've just enabled the profile corrections for the lens and remove chromatic aberration. We can come down here. I'm going to add a little bit of a vignette because, you know, I quite like that on a portrait, especially a portrait like this. Next up, I'm going to move the red primary towards the orange a little bit and the blue primary towards the teal. A bit of a teal and orange kind of color grade. Turn that off, turn that on. It's not making a huge difference, but I like this as a kind of base level for where we're going to get to. What I am going to do is actually turn this color grading off where we've added colors into the shadows, the midtones and the highlights because I'm just not loving it at the moment. We can always come back and turn it on. So let's go to the saturation here for the hue, saturation and luminance. Let's bring the greens down a little bit and the yellows down a touch as well. That helps a little bit because we don't have such a strong color behind, which I think is good. Let's go to luminance though, and we can bring that green down a touch as well as maybe the yellow. Now we don't want to go too mad. A bit like before when I said, you know, if we bring it all the way down, that's what it's going to look like. Control Z to undo, which is not ideal. Same with the greens. It's not going to be ideal. It looks a bit ridiculous. Whereas I think that actually works quite well. Yes, you've got bright background behind, but she's nice and bright in the image. So let's come up and let's click masking here. Now you'll notice I haven't named the last mask we did, which was the eyes. So let's double click that. I'm going to name that eyes. Just a nice way of keeping things really organized, and we can come back so easily now and actually play around with them, change them up if we want to. But by naming them, it makes it so much easier. And it's such a nice way of working. So we're going to click create new mask. Let's go brush. And what we're going to do here is we're going to do a bit of dodging, so lightening parts of the image. I'm going to bring the exposure up on this brush, increase the size of the brush by using the mouse scroll wheel. And I'm just going to paint this on to my subject. Now I'm going to bring the flow down here to about, let's go about 65. That's going to really help with kind of painting this on gradually, building it up. We don't want to go full on straight away. So I'm going to go ahead and do this here, painting this on really on one side. Now what I do want to do is just catch this eye as well, a little bit over here. I think that looks quite nice. We can actually turn this off by pressing this little eye icon here. So that's quite nice. We've kind of lightened one side, which is rather nice, rather kind of pleasant. So let's just lighten some of this white fur here as well. Now we can create another new mask. Let's go brush. This one, we're going to darken some areas. So I'm going to bring the exposure down a little bit, and I'm going to darken kind of the other side of like her face, down maybe her body. And what's really nice about this is once we've masked this on, we can actually come back and adjust the exposure values, things like that, to either lighten it further, darken it further, reduce the amount that we're darkening it. But this is a little bit how I would approach a portrait of a person. I would probably go in and shape the light like this. So I think it's a nice way of doing it. If I turn this off, you can see it's made a bit of a difference there. We might want to bring the exposure down even a little bit further. Let's just paint some more on around here. And then we need to name these as well. So I'm going to put dodging for the one that is lightning, and then burning for the one that is darkening. And if we turn that one off, the dodging, you can see the difference that's making. And then the burning, you can see the difference that's making. Now we can come back, we can reduce the amount that's darkening things. And then lastly, what I want to do is create a new mask. I want to make a linear gradient. I'm going to pull that in from the left a bit like this. And I'm going to just boost up the exposure and bring dehaze down a little bit. Maybe the exposure is too much there. Because what that's doing now is kind of almost simulating a bit of sunlight coming in from that side. So let's click done. I quite Actually, let's name that mask first. Double click sunlight. Let's click done. Quite happy with how this is coming out. And let's look at before and after. So backslash key on the keyboard. This was before, this is after. So you can see quite a massive difference. Now, what we've done here is we've really darkened the area behind her very kind of subtly, and we've lightened her quite dramatically. So it kind of offsets that problem. She has now become the brightest part of the image without going too crazy, darkening that area behind. We also don't want to, it's a little bit like with the sun. It probably should be a bit overexposed, the sun, right, in a photo. Similarly here, we don't want to go too crazy with making that background darker because it's just not very natural. It's not going to be a natural way of looking at the photo. It's going to look very strange. So I can just bring maybe the overall exposure down a touch, and I might just lift the shadows a touch to see what that does. That mostly plays around with her, so I'm quite happy with that. We can also press Y to see the before and after side by side, a bit like that. And I think we've done a really nice job of kind of actually getting a nice exposure for this. Lastly, we might want to play around a little bit with the white balance. I think it's probably basically fine, but maybe just get rid of a bit of magenta. I think that's maybe a bit better. Maybe add in a warmer tone here. See how that looks? I think that looks quite nice. I'm pretty happy with how this has come out. And that is probably where I would look to leave this photo. I think before and after, I think we've made a big difference. So I'm pretty happy with that. Now, of course, every pet is different, will require a slightly different kind of editing. And this is obviously more of a portrait shot versus maybe an action shot, which might be a little bit different as well. But hopefully a lot of these techniques will carry over for you and are helpful. And really it's how I would edit a portrait of a person. I'd take the same sort of approach here because it is basically a portrait. It's no different from a portrait of a person just because it's a dog. Doesn't really make any major difference into how I approach both taking the photo and then also editing it as well. Don't forget to like and subscribe for new videos every day through to the 24th. And of course, new content all the time after that as well. Don't worry about that. I will of course see you tomorrow. And as always, thanks for watching.